Brawlhalla's newest weapon, the Chakram, comes out in less than 1 week, and we finally have some official footage. So today, we're going to talk about everything you need to know to be prepared for its release, including stuff that I've never seen anyone talk about. But first up, let's talk about this neutral light. Now, the Chakram, if you don't know, has two different modes. So this is the fused mode. You can see the Chakram is together, and this neutral light is sending far. So here is the logic with this weapon. The fused version is for knockouts, it's heavier hits, and the split version, which we'll see very shortly, is for setup. Now, that's not to say that you can't set up with this one as well. We could see it hit at that angle to lead into a neutral sig. What I'm showing right here is a very interesting movement mechanic. Look how far this Priya slides when using that NLight. And this next clip here is even more pronounced because you're just launching off stage. This is something about pretty much every single one of Chakram's moves, with the exception of one of them, which I will talk about, of course. The momentum is crazy, the mobility is crazy, but before I get into all of that, let's take a look at this split version of the neutral light. You can see instead of one big hit, it's two small hits, and it's sending nowhere. Even in the red, it's sending nowhere. Take a look at this side-by-side difference at pretty much about equal HP values, and that discrepancy is clear. So alright, if you're using the fused version for big hits, for knockouts, what do you use this split version for? Well, for setups. You can see because it sends the opponent pretty much nowhere at all HP values, you're going to have consistent setup options at those HP values. It's also extremely quick, so you can cover yourself in case you miss. That's a side light missing into an instant neutral light right where you are, and we know that those types of hitboxes can be very effective. That's a neutral light into neutral air into side air, by the way. This move is going to be fantastic for building up the damage. Think about a move like Scythe NLight and how you can cover yourself. It's kind of similar to that. Next up, we've got the side light, which is this frisbee discus boomerang toss, and it is a boomerang toss. We're going to get into that in just a second here, but if you take a look, your momentum actually does freeze upon using this move, and this is the one move in the kit that feels more stationary, more stagnant than everything else, because everything else, it's going to be hard to catch. And talk about catch, you can see you're catching the Chakram on the way back. You're not the only one. The opponent is vulnerable to that backside hit of the boomerang, and this is something that I like a lot. I think this can get very fancy. You can see you set up into these weird scenarios where you're launching the Chakram away from you, maybe catching a dodge, reading a dodge movement or something like that, and then you hit them behind you into a string. That is very cool. Now, this is the other version. This is the split version, and instead of knocking your opponents away from you, you're pulling them in, and you can see even in the red, very similar to the neutral light, they're not going anywhere. Of course, this is going to be amazing for setting up into strings. There's that side light into neutral light into a potential string read with the side air. Here it is catching out someone's jump, someone's recovery, and even in this deep red, it's not going to send anywhere, like I said, which means you can get a dodge read. Look at this beautiful reverse N-sig, knowing that it's going to cover a whole bunch of options. That is genius. Moving on now to the most unique and maybe most important part of Chakram's kit, the downlight. This is how you swap mode. So if you start off fused, it becomes split. If you start off split, it becomes fused. How can you use this? Well, you can see right here, knock your opponent away, swap modes, or you can just use it as a straight up attack itself. You can see the opponent is getting sent a good distance away from you. It's very quick. This is also probably a knockout tool, and you can see right here this opponent is going for, or I should say this Priya is going for the downlight near the ledge against their opponent. It doesn't land. I don't have footage of that landing in the red, but I do presume it knocks pretty far away because we could see even in the white it was launching. As is the case with most of these Chakra moves, the other version is a setup tool. As we can see, this is a bit of a similar situation. Knock your opponent away, use the downlight, and quickly swap, but you can also use this as an attack itself. Here is another example, by the way, of doing that very quickly. Let's say maybe you want to save your teammate. This is something the DAir, the other version of DAir, is great for. You can just quickly use that downlight, jump off stage, save your teammate by sending them upward. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. But we can see right here, setup tool as well, launching your opponent perfectly upward, maybe to get neutral light potentially, a side air potentially, maybe even a dodge read with a down air or a side light. So it seems like you have a lot of freedom in how you want to play this weapon. Overall, this ground kit seems very, very strong. The neutral light reminds me a lot of Scythe neutral light. The downlight is extremely quick. It might be a potential knockout tool similar to Greatsword GC downlight, although definitely not the same level of force. Maybe more akin to sword downlight, it's just you don't get the combo. And then the side light is a little bit more iffy. It does freeze you in place. It does seem harder to use and harder to manage, but ultimately a very strong move with a big disjoint. There's so much you can do. You can just change up everything constantly, and that seems very great. And by the way, talking about changing things up, I just changed up my entire Discord server. I know I never advertised that I even have one, but now I'm doing it because I'm very annoying. Join if you want. There's a lot of cool stuff. We have daily question of the days and everything. That's all from me though. I'll stop talking about it. Let's move on to the aerials. Neutral air is first up, and I'm about to say something a little crazy because this, as simple as it looks, might be one of the best moves in Brawlhalla, and I mean that with full sincerity. Do you see how far that is knocking away? That is the fused version of the Nair. It is a potential knockout tool. It is not even potential, it is a knockout tool. It's very fast, it has very little recovery frames, and it's very similar to the split version. The main difference, instead of swiping once, now you're swiping twice, and instead of sending your opponent extremely far, you're setting them up for a potential combo. The way that this move works, and this goes for both versions of the Nair, appears to be very similar to the bow. In the way that it's around you, it's a bit of a circle. You can freeze yourself in place, that's what I was showing right there. Completely stop yourself and just punish your opponent for doing anything, for just existing. If this move retains the amount of mobility and the amount of drift that they're showing in this footage here, this is a top tier move. And you're gonna see top players jumping around using this non-stop. Side air is incredibly versatile on the Chakram's kit. You can see it is a potential knockout tool as well when it's the fused version. Again, similar trend, although it is a little bit different for the split, and I'll get into that in a second. It's a little bit of a buzzsaw type of animation there, and then you launch your opponent off to the side. It's very fast. It has a lot of fluidity. You can really control where you're going with the drift. I'll have one clip coming up just to demonstrate that because it is ridiculous. This is the split version though first, and this doesn't really send all that far, at least in the white, because as you reach the orange and the red, it actually is, and it reminds me more of the Battle Boot SAir than something like, I don't know, Scythe NAir, where it only sends very far, really, really deep, because even in the orange, it's having a good amount of distance. And this is one of those things where you might want to swap over to a different version once your opponent reaches into the red, because the fused version is going to have a lot more force. And this is the clip that I was talking about. The drift is pretty crazy. Look how far that Priya is going. How in the world are you gonna punish that? I suppose that's a question for us to answer next week. But what's not a question is how much I love this down air. It's a disjoint, you throw the Chakram below you, it's a bit of a crescent moon hitbox, we've gone over this, that is great, and it sends straight down. That is a fantastic angle to spike your opponent. You can see the force there is also nothing to scoff at. I imagine this other Priya was very deep in the red. Of course, it's not going to do that all the time, but it's not only useful offstage. Of course, down airs are useful pretty much everywhere on the map, including when you're getting juggled, which is great because it's a disjoint. Now here is something very, very interesting. You can see you bounce on the ground if you use it near the ground, and you retain your momentum. You can stall in the air, you can stall your jumps, you can, look at that. No punish because the other Priya thought they were going to land. That is great. However, it's not just a go home free, get out of jail, go home free, what am I talking about? Get out of jail free card. You gotta use it in the right spots, because if you don't, you might get punished like so. Either way, fantastic move. This looks incredibly fun. It is really, really scary, to be frank with you, because any kind of disjoint that is also a spike, yeah, I mean, that's just gonna steal your stocks away. The split version actually functions quite differently. You can see when you use it in the air, there's a little bit of an air stall, as well as hitting your opponents upward, or I should say hitting anyone you connect with upward. Here is a great example of this vertical stall. Look at how Priya just freezes in the air for a second there. That's really interesting. We don't really have a down air that does this. It kind of used to work like that with the orb ground pound. That's another story for another day. Look at that momentum. Look at that drift. Again, how are you going to punish some of these moves? It looks a little scary, but also you gotta be a little careful. Look how you just get frozen if you connect it directly on the ground. So same with the other version of the downer there. You gotta be careful about that grounded version, although it does look very strong. That was an example of potentially saving your teammate, and then here, potentially leading into some strings. You can dash off stage, and because of the movement, because you get frozen in the air, it might be a little bit safer than something else. You can land with it, potentially combo. That wasn't a combo, but you can see the idea behind it. This move, I think, may define the Chakram kit. And let's finish off this Chakram kit with the final 2 moves, or should I say the final 4 moves. This Chakram Recovery with the Fuse version appears functionally similar to Sword Recovery or Recovery. It's probably somewhere in between those two. You can see you have a lot of backwards drift when you use it, as well as a good amount of force. You're swinging around yourself twice, and it looks like if one of those connects, it's going to send your opponent flying upward. You can potentially get a read scenario after a neutral light, and this is the split version. Now, it appears actually quite similar animation-wise, but you can see it's a multi-hit, and it doesn't send your opponent as far when you're landing it. It seems like this move is a lot faster. Maybe you recover a lot quicker. Maybe you get a lot higher. By the way, that's the exhausted recovery. Kind of insane that that worked that way. Anyway, my point that I was saying is it seems a lot faster than the Fuse version, but when we slow this down, it doesn't actually appear to be the case. They start at about the same time, they get about the same height, and then actually both of them start attacking at about the same rate. So I'm not entirely sure what the big difference between these two is. Maybe it has to do with the momentum upon first use, but either way, both seem very strong. Here is the final move, the ground pound. Unfortunately, the devs in this dev stream never landed the ground pound, so you would think there's no footage of either the fused or the split version. Luckily, I've got the exclusive scoop. This is from the BCX test build, so of course things are subject to change, but from our understanding, the ground pound sends diagonally with the fuse version, and then when you land the split version, which you can see is kind of like a punch, you have one of the chakrams out, and then you might punch with the other one. That's indeed what happens, and this also gives an air stall. It has the second hit coming out guaranteed with a bit of an air stall, which is quite different from the other version. So although they look similar animation wise, or maybe the way that you're falling, it's actually very, very different. It also doesn't seem like it has nearly the amount of force that the other one had. Now finally, for some little niche things to clear up, this is the weapon toss animation. It glides and bounces alongside the stage with quite a good amount of speed, quite a good bounce there as well. I mean, it's very similar to like everything else in the game, so what do you expect? What I'm really showing here though is that when you toss the weapon, you are swapping modes back to fused. It always goes back to fused. And finally, when you jump with the split one, you do a little spin.